Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're talking about the top 10 cards you should consider side decking for the August 2020 format. Guys, if you are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video. If you want the channel out, there are tons of links in the description to do so. Check out the Patreon, the Gemmy app if you want to get your one-on-one coaching with yours truly, as well as your crosswell competitive articles. Check out deck protection if you need your sleeves, deck boxes, binders, any of that stuff. And finally, guys, if you want to buy the cards you see in today's video, make sure you use my link in the description to TCG Player. All that stuff really helps out a great deal. Really appreciate each and every one of you guys that does that for the channel. That being said, let's get started. So the first card that we pretty much always talk about in these side deck videos, Dark Power Black Mass Sand. This guy has a lot of applications actually in this format, which is pretty cool. Like against Vegex, it's okay because it stops them from playing their Trunks Time Agent, stops them from playing their Supreme Kai of Time. Doesn't really stop the 4-drop Vegeta, but it's okay for that scenario if you want to like main deck it or maybe bring it in against Vegex if you don't have anything better to side in. Also quite good against Obuni. A lot of times blue has trouble answering this 1-drop, and I've mentioned before that 1-drops aren't the easiest thing to answer for a few reasons. One of those reasons being that, you know, a lot of the removal we have in the game, like either, you know, is wide board removal or it's like big cost removal. So, you know, using a 3 or 4 drop to remove a pesky little 1-drop oftentimes just feels really bad as the player removing the Dark Power Black Mass Sand. But if you put the blue player in the position where they have to answer it, you're pretty much winning on that exchange in that scenario. Also a great card against AOD, does some pretty cool things against their like garlic plays, things like that. So definitely just a good card to have in the side deck overall. Definitely wanted to talk about that first. Makobora, the Broken Seal. This card is very interesting. Essentially, you name a card character and a energy cost, and your opponent cannot play a card of that cost or name for the rest of the turn. That was a little clunky for me to say, but really this is another card kind of like Dark Power Black Mass Sand that just has application in so many matchups. And honestly, Makobora here might have more application than Dark Power Black Mass Sand. There's pretty much always going to be a card you can name and get value out of Makobora. It almost makes it worthy of like a main deck slot in any deck, but obviously we have colors to play with and themes to play with, and this doesn't necessarily fit in a lot of those themes. But if you are playing like maybe a Frieza Dark Dragon Ball deck, for example, you can play it in the main deck of a deck like that. But regardless, you know, U7 Invoker, you call Son Goku 6-drop. Against blue, you can call Obuni 4-drop. Against yellow, you can call like Bardock for the Bardock Raiders Warcry 4-drop, or Bergamo versus Roar 5-drop. So there's just so many applications in every single matchup. You can get value out of this card. So if you're really uncertain what to side or just really want a coverall side deck card, I think Makobora is probably one of the best cards you can go with side decking in this format, and possibly, you know, just going forward in general because of how general it is as a card. Secret Identity Mass Sand. Most decks should probably side deck, if not main deck, this card. I understand not maining it, especially if, you know, you have some drop area synergies, if you have some sparking effects, but there's a lot of decks out there right now, like Vegex, like even Skillets we saw from the 1K over the weekend, and AOD, that they just go really wide on the board with relatively low cost battle cards. So having a Secret Identity Mass Sand in the sideboard or the main deck just to answer those boards for 0 energy, then you get a free 25k beater out of it to either pressure leader, pressure unison, maybe pressure another battle card that you couldn't warp. It's just an excellent card to consider for the side deck. I really do think that most side decks, if not main decks, should definitely contain this card. So definitely give it a shot. Next up, we're talking about Foo Shrouded Mystery. This is one of my favorite cards to talk about in the side deck spot. Now, of course, you could main deck this, but again, there's going to be scenarios where you don't want to main it. Like, let's say you're playing Vegex, for example. You know, you're a faster aggro deck. Well, some decks like Sin Shenron, some decks like Invoker, they're going to be able to stall you out because they are defensive control decks. They're going to be able to take you to turns, you know, 6, 7 sometimes, and you just want that boss monster that comes down and ends the game. And this guy really does just come down and end the game against a lot of decks. The only situation where he's really iffy is against blue, because they can just overall, you know, stop the play of this card and nullify all of its effects. But even against yellow, where they can rest it with like SS4 Vegeta Prideful Transformation or cards like that, like with Crusher Ball type of effects, this guy is still going to come down, blank the board. Green can't answer it with Charismatic Villain. Red can't answer it with a Yamcha counterplay. So keeping that in mind, this just really just comes down and just, you know, nullifies all your opponent's effects unless they're playing blue. And I really like this card. Besides a side deck slot, I like it as an SCR alternative. This really is probably the card in the game that you should consider as a budget secret rare that you can actually play 4 copies of if you wanted to. I mean, you really would never play 4 copies. You'd probably play like 2 at most. But the point is, I talked about in my deck profile earlier this week where SS4 Gogeta you know, it seems like a powerful card, but the more I play with it, the more it just hinders my strategy. You know, I play it down, and yeah, I rip 2 cards out of my opponent's hand, I kill 2 of their battle cards, I get 2 energy back, I draw 2 cards. Lots of pluses and minuses going on there, but attack, it gets negated, right? Attack, it gets negated. It just doesn't have that game-ending power. It is very, very good in terms of momentum swings, but Foo Shrouded Mystery in most of your matchups is going to come down, nullify all of your opponent's effects. Most decks pretty much can play an Overwhelm 10, you know, especially by turn 6, especially if you're not playing Overwhelms in the beginning of the game. Even if you have drop area synergies, even if you have sparking effects that you need to get off, the Foo comes down at the last turn of the game ideally. So if you're overwhelming 10, getting rid of your drop area, even if you need your drop area for most of the game, you can pretty much make that sacrifice to play the Foo and hopefully go in with your already established board. The only main scenarios where Foo is going to feel pretty lackluster against the non-blue decks is if your opponent's doing a pretty good job of like keeping your board clear. But if you can create a pretty overwhelming board by like turn 4, turn 5, and then turn 6 get to Foo Shrouded Mystery, I think you're really going to feel the positive effects of this card. And a lot of matches in this format are going late. You know, if you're not playing against Vegex, if you're not playing against Reboot Gohan and AOD in some scenarios, the games are going to go to like turn 6 and beyond. So having Foo Shrouded Mystery in the side deck, maybe consider it a budget alternative to an SCR. I think it's actually a very good budget alternative to an SCR. Protector of the People, this is mainly for the decks that can't play Bean, obviously the non-blue decks, but you need to have another answer to Obuni. Obuni comes down, spams 3 15k tokens, and then itself is a 20k attacker. Having Protector of the People, it's almost like a Nimbus in the sense that it's a negate. You have to pitch a card, but it is generic to any deck that you're playing, which I do like as a side deck option for that reason. And then your leader continues to get 5k as more battle cards attack into it. So this is a great answer to Obuni, but there's going to be a lot of decks where this is a really good card in general. Once again, AOD, it's going to be a great card for that matchup because they're putting a ton of battle cards into the board, and your leader is just constantly gaining 5k and constantly gaining value as your opponent's attacking into your leader, trying to put pressure on you. They're just not going to be able to do it. So, you know, costing 2 cards might seem pricey at first in terms of, you know, card economy and hand advantage, but when you consider how many cards it would cost you to stop, you know, a field full of Vegex battle cards, or a field full of Obuni tokens, or a field full of AOD 15 and 20ks, you're gonna, you know, really weigh that, and you're gonna see that the 2 cards Protector of the People is going to be highly worth it after, you know, your opponent's done with their barrage of attacks. So very good card in the side deck to consider no matter what deck you're playing. Another very generic card, even though it is blue, Westkai Keeping Watch. This is a 1-drop barrier auto. When you combo this card, choose one of your cards in your opponent's combo area and return it to the owner's hand. The main thing you're going to be using this for in this format is going to be against Vegex. You really want to get those Bibbities out of the combo area. Now here's the thing with that, right? So your opponent's going in for game, they're dropping Bibbidi, trying to kill you obviously, and you're using the Westkai Keeping Watch to get the Bibbidi back to their hand, nullify all that combo power. They will still have the Bibbidi for their next turn playing defense, but if it was like a game-winning shot, for example, they may have comboed the rest of their hand, so that one Bibbidi may not matter all too much. Now, if they have a few cards in their hand, maybe they just want to drop the Bibbidi and see what you would do, especially in games 2 or 3, they might be foreseeing the Westkai Keeping Watch, but with that in mind, it's still a card you'd rather have than not have, and then at least on your next turn, you can possibly apply the pressure to make them use the Bibbidi. Another great matchup for this card is going to be yellow Gotenks, or even Shin-Shenron in some cases, where they're playing Bardock Raiders Warcry. They're going to offensively Raiders. You're going to use Westkai, bounce it back to their hand, and they're not going to get to play the card, which is very good. It's almost like Trunksing it if you're playing blue, playing the Zeno Unison, but if you're playing this combo card, you can really play this in any deck, no matter what Unison you're playing, right? Mutato Skill of a Sage, this is a card that I feel like people really do forget about when they're playing yellow decks, even if it's not like a multicolor yellow deck, or even if it's like not a yellow base deck, if they're splashing yellow. You know, a lot of people want to play Chomp of the Trickster, and I totally understand that. You want to play the 15k beater, you want to play the version of this card that basically draws a card, but if you're playing mono yellow, or even if you're playing a, you know, yellow splash deck where you don't really want to be tapping to energy, Mutato Skill of a Sage is an excellent card to consider, especially considering the fact that it has like a pro and a con when compared to Chomp the Trickster. The pro being your opponent cannot restand that card that you tap with Mutato for the rest of the turn. That's very good, but Mutato only hits battle cards that are greater than the opponent's energy cost. But let's be honest, most of the cards using Chomp the Trickster on, Mutato is going to be able to hit as well. The number 1 target is probably going to be Cell's, you know, Unspeakable Abomination, the Secret Rare. So I think this is going to be a great card to consider if you know, maybe don't want to pay 2 for Champa, or you just want to play mono yellow. I think this is going to be a great card to consider for sure. Next up, Absolute Confidence. One of my teammates, Andy, actually made a really interesting comment to me about this card. I wanted to mention it to you guys. This card is almost like Cronoa versus Shugesh when that format was, a thing a few months ago. So keeping that in mind, what I mean by that is the threat of this card is probably enough to make your blue opponents, mainly Vegito, and to a point Vegex as well, make those opponents hesitant to go in on their unisons for all-ins or for game, right? So with this card in the side deck, as long as you have like one energy up, because that can be Bean into Absolute Confidence, as long as you're showing the threat of this card, you may not even have to side deck it. But if you think your opponent, either isn't thinking about this card or you just really want to have it to be safe, it is a great one of in the side deck if you are playing some type of blue. Nice thing is you don't need a blue leader for this. You could be playing like blue yellow Gotenks, for example. Once again, just keep one blue up, have a Bean in your hand, and then use Absolute Confidence to take a marker off of the opponent's unison card. They're going to lose all their double strikes, triple strikes, dual attacks, all that good stuff. Very solid application in the format. Next up, this is a more specific side deck, but I want to mention if you are playing Blue Zamasu, definitely consider side decking the Tragedy Overground package if you are not maining it. There are many decks that, honestly, they just can't beat this package. Like a lot of control decks, they're trying to play battle cards higher than 4 cost, and you just basically tell them no, right? You basically tell them, like, you can't play battle cards. This field card cannot be removed by skills, so that's just, really strong there. And even a deck like Yellow Gotenks, like, they can't play Raider's Warcry, they can't play Bergamo Ferocious Roar, they can't play the Gotenks Fusion. So having reach in all those different matchups, like, yeah, it's not gonna be great against aggro, but you just don't side it against aggro, right? So I think this is a great side deck option to consider if you're going to play Blue Zamasu. Next up, guys, for the last thing I want to talk about in this, I want to talk about wide board hate. So two of the more popular cards, for decks like AOD specifically, but also, Skillless, we saw that do very well this past weekend. You want to have some wide board hate for those types of decks. Two very popular versions of that right now that are very generic: Kami Global Unifier and an Unexpected Turn. Kami basically gets you the draw 1, you can play it on turn 1 for the cantrip, pay 2 if your opponent has 4 more battle cards, wipe the board, right? Unexpected Turn, a little bit more specific. Your opponent has to have pretty specific energy cost cards on the field, but you do get to board wipe, set them all to the warp, and ignore barrier, although Kami does ignore barrier as well. Next up, I want to talk about two more color specific board wipes. Android 21 Destructive Villain. I actually saw a lot of success with this card over the weekend when I was playing Vegito at that 1k. The nice thing about this card is you play it, you kill one of your energy, you send all battle cards 4 or less back to the bottom of the deck, and the thing about that is you're losing an energy at the end of the turn anyway when you have your Zeno out, so you're basically making value out of that extra energy that you're going to lose no matter what. So whether you're playing Zamasu, whether you're playing Vegito, this is a good board wiping option for you to consider. And then of course in red, there's SS Vegeta Exploiting Weakness, as well as Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken Goku Concentrated Destruction, just getting those board wipes down. Concentrated Destruction is pretty good because it has Deflect, so you can play that against like AOD, whereas Exploiting Weakness is going to be victim to the Android 13 counterplay, but depending on certain matchups, both are going to be good options for different scenarios. So guys, that's what I want to talk about today with the 10 cards you should consider side decking. Hopefully this helps you out in your tournaments coming up, whether online or in person. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time.